And so it's not really a question about whether people are ready to change and whether they're motivated. It's the question of landing on something that's a good fit for this patient and a good place for them to get started.
How do you get someone to change their behavior? Behavior change is so complicated because it requires a person to disrupt a current habit while simultaneously fostering a new, unfamiliar set of actions. This process takes time, a long time, and multiple messy attempts. Whether the change involves diet, exercise, dependencies, or anything else, changing behavior is one of the hardest things any of us will ever try to do. I'm Colleen Sloan, a dietitian, PA, and your nutrition mentor. Welcome to the Exam Room Nutrition Podcast, your guide to giving better nutrition advice. As medical providers, we know the result we want our patients to achieve. But why is it so hard leading them to get there? You've probably heard the saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. In other words, a horse that's led to water will only drink if it's thirsty. As a clinician, we can clearly point someone in the direction of success, but in the end, the person must want to change. Today's episode is going to challenge the way you approach behavior change with your patients. My guest today doesn't believe that change has to be hard, and with the right tools, every patient can succeed. Yes, even the one you're thinking about right now. So join me in welcoming Laura Kohler. Laura is a clinical dietitian for more than 20 years, working primarily with people with kidney disease on dialysis. She is passionate about helping healthcare professionals achieve high rates of client success by making behavior change as easy and stress-free as possible. Well, hey, Laura, I am so excited to have this conversation with you. Thank you so much for being here today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Colleen. I am so excited to be here today.
I can't wait to jump into this conversation because this is kind of the premise behind why I started this podcast. I actually want to share how you and I met, and it's through LinkedIn. And I saw one of your posts and it just resonated so much to me. So I would love for you to just share with the listeners what that post was and the premise behind your philosophy on how you care for patients.
So the post that you're talking about, I was saying that there is basically one thing that I do every single time that I meet with the patient. And that one thing is that I assume the client wants to succeed. I think a lot of us assume that when something isn't going well, that maybe the client isn't trying, or maybe the client isn't capable of doing something. But what I do is I assume that life is getting in the way. I think that's really important because I think a lot of the times we do make these assumptions and these judgments about people, especially when we've been working with people for a long amount of time. And it's really easy to kind of get stuck in that mindset of, this person can't do that. We call people non-compliant, right? And what I really have discovered more often than not, when I sit down to actually talk to somebody, is they're struggling with something. And so what I encourage other practitioners to do is to ask their patients when they're not being successful, what is hard about this? What's making this difficult for you? And to have that conversation, because that's going to be a lot more productive and that's going to help to open up some doors that you might not see otherwise.
It was just so impactful, that post that you had made. And I was like, I have to have her on the podcast because this is so in line with what I teach my listeners. And it can be applicable to all areas of medicine and nutrition, really, whether you work in pediatrics, whether you work in dialysis like yourself, or whether you work with patients trying to lose weight. We all have difficulties. And like you said, sometimes it's not just about the food or the diet per se, but something else might be going on. And I think it's so important to just ask curious questions. And I think that impacts your relationship with your patient so much. So I really love that post. I love that you put in air quotations that the patient, we label them as non-compliant. And I actually just did an Instagram reel about that because I really hate that terminology, because there's a reason that they're not following what you're prescribing. They're not non-compliant. They're having a difficult time being successful. So that leads me really nicely into my first question about behavior change. And what are some of the misconceptions that clinicians have about behavior change?
Oh my goodness, there are so many. One of the first ones is that information actually changes behaviors. And this is something that we assume in our interactions with people that if I tell somebody what to do, that they're going to actually go and do it. And I think most of us, when we were trained with a limited number of actual behavior change strategies. It's not something that people sat us down in a classroom and said, okay, here's all the different things that you can do. It's sort of something that we've picked up along the way. And one of the things that we picked up along the way, and one of the ways that we've learned, and one of the ways that we've observed other people teaching patients, is we observe people giving information. We spend a lot of time looking for the right handout, right? We want to find exactly the right information. Like if we land on just the right handout, that's going to solve everything, right? And the truth is that information, whether it's telling people about the benefits of doing something or telling people about the negative consequences if they don't take action, that's not what actually translates into people being able to take action. Those are two separate things. So one of the first misconceptions that I would say is that information changes behaviors. Another one is we assume that there's a specific timeline for behavior change. We think that when you tell somebody to do something, they're going to leave your office and they're going to do it. And when they come back the next time and they haven't done it, we're like, wow, something's wrong. But the truth is change is not instant. If you Google how long does behavior change take, you'll see people saying 21 days, 28 days. And the truth is that there is no specific timeline for behavior change. There was one study that was done, it's probably close to 20 years ago right now, but they actually looked at different behaviors and how long it took people to actually change those behaviors. And what they discovered is that behavior change took anywhere from 18 days to almost 9 months to change behavior. And the average was somewhere around 3 months. So if you're asking somebody to go home and do something, and it might be something as simple as, hey, I need you to start taking this new pill, or I need you to think about eating in a different way or preparing foods differently, et cetera, it's going to take some time for the person to assimilate that information and think about how they're going to carry it out. Like there's a lot of processes, even if it sounds really simple to you. Another assumption is that change has to be big in order to be significant. So we tell people they need to walk for 30 minutes every single day. That's going to be what's going to help you to achieve good health. And if people don't do 30 minutes 5 times a week, there's something that's wrong with that. And what the research actually shows there is that getting started is really the most important thing. And if somebody can get started by walking for 5 minutes every single day, if somebody can just start by, getting on their shoes and walking out the door just once, like that is a step that's in the positive direction. And there's this assumption that you can actually make somebody else change. And I think that's one of the other things, like, oh, if I tell them how important this is, if I keep talking about this, then this other person is going to change. And unfortunately, you can't make somebody else change. And in some ways that makes you feel powerless as a clinician. No matter what I do, I can't make this other person change, but there are many things that you can do to empower this other person to change. So, when somebody doesn't change, it's not your failure. It's also not necessarily their failure. Sometimes it's just that we haven't used the right tools and strategies. We haven't landed on the right formula for that person. So the last one that I'll share with you is we have this assumption that when people aren't changing, it means that they're not motivated or they're not ready to change. This builds on the idea of the non-compliant patient that we were talking about earlier. What I've discovered is it often doesn't have anything to do with motivation. I mean, literally, they showed up, they're sitting with you in your office. They are motivated to take care of their health. The issue is that they're struggling somewhere. And maybe they're not ready to make the big change that you're suggesting to them right now. But what I've discovered and what the research will bear out is that if you can make something easier and smaller, people don't actually need as much motivation to get started. And so it's not really a question about whether people are ready to change and whether they're motivated. It's the question of landing on something that's a good fit for this patient and a good place for them to get started.
Okay, we could just end the podcast right there because that was full of powerful stuff. Laura, that was so good. I'm sitting over here taking so many notes, just writing all this stuff down because you said so many clinical pearls that I think are so important for us as clinicians to just grasp and understand. And I think the biggest one, and it actually leads us nicely into the next question, is that feeling of being powerless as a clinician, because, we all went into healthcare wanting to help people, right? And to improve their health and improve their longevity. But when we are across from a patient who is struggling with their weight and we know what things they need to do to get on the right track for their health, but they just won't, we feel like it's our responsibility, right? It's so easy to have that burden of responsibility on our shoulders as a clinician. And I think you made a really good point that it's not our responsibility, but we need to find the right framework or the right tools or the right goal for the patient to feel like they can achieve something. And so let's speak to the clinician who is feeling powerless and who just has patient after patient who won't change and they're really frustrated. And really they're at the point where they're like, all of my patients are non-compliant. Nobody's doing what I'm telling them to do. So how can we reframe that thinking and help our practitioners help our patients with changing their behaviors?
So there are definitely some concrete steps and of a framework that you can follow as a clinician that will empower you to be able to help your patients. And I think it's really important to decide, what is your job and what are the things that are your patient's job. So you need to get really clear on what you can do to empower them so that when they leave, they can be better at doing their job. So I've identified 3 areas that are really important for practitioners to focus on when they're really looking at empowering their patients. The first one is building connection. This is absolutely one of the most important things that you can do. And to be honest, if it's the only thing that you manage to do during your visit with that patient, it's the most important. So in terms of building connection, it means basically showing people that you care about them, you want to hear about them, and helping them to feel seen and heard and valued. And it's just a matter, to be honest, of listening. The great irony in terms of building connection is that often the less that you say, the more your client feels that you care about them. So finding strategies to build connection, using motivational interviewing, if that's something that you've learned and you've gotten good at using, but really just making sure that your care and your concern for them is the primary place that all of these, suggestions, requests, and recommendations are coming from. The second thing is that you can look at exploring some different change strategies. There are a lot of great strategies out there, and some of them have been out there for a decade or longer. So these are things that are evidence-based and specifically looking at behaviors and habits and systems. I think a lot of us spend a lot of our time focusing specifically on results and what the results are that people are getting. But the truth is that our behaviors are the things that drive our results. And in the words of James Clear in his Atomic Habits, results are actually a lagging measure of what our behaviors and our habits are. So helping people to focus specifically on behaviors is something that's going to be really advantageous. If you're not achieving that goal, what is it that you're doing now? What is it that you might be able to do differently that's going to help you to get closer to getting there? And also looking at making things easier. How can you shrink something so that people are going to be more willing and able to do it? And also, this is actually, it seems like such a small thing. It seems kind of obvious, but helping people to set prompts or triggers for knowing when to do something. If you're going to ask somebody, take this medication, incorporating exercise into your life is something that's going to be really important. Go the next step further and say, when can you actually fit this into your life? When is some time that you can actually do that in your day-to-day living? When people actually set an implementation intention like that, deciding when they're actually going to do a specific behavior, it can double their chances for achieving success. And then the third thing that you can do is to really support a change mindset. And this goes back to that post that we discussed at the beginning of this podcast about assuming that the client wants to succeed. I think many of us don't really realize how powerful our mindsets that we bring into the room with our patients can actually be. And the truth is that can be one of the most empowering things that you can do is to adopt the belief that this person can succeed and to help them to see that also. So the change mindset is it's your beliefs, it's your assumptions, it's your judgments that you have about yourself and about other people. And there's so much research that's out there showing that when you sit down with somebody and you radiate to them that you have the power to change this. And I know it hasn't happened yet. That's part of the process. Just because you haven't gotten there yet says nothing about what's to come up ahead. You've already overcome all these different obstacles. You've tried all of these different things so far. We're getting closer and closer every single time. You can do this, and I'm here to support you.
If I was your patient sitting across from you, I would literally get up right now and be like, yes, I can totally do this. Like, I feel so encouraged and so motivated by you. And it just pours out of your nature. And I love that about you. And I think that clinicians need to mirror that skill that you have because, like you said, it's so impactful, even if that's the only thing that you do. So it's kind of like reverse engineering, helping our patients change. And I wanted to linger a little bit on the first method that you had discussed and where you said it's about building connection. And if that's like the only thing you do, then you've been successful. And I love that you defined, okay, well, what exactly is connection? Like, what does that mean? How do we do that? And you had said the patient needs to feel seen, heard, and valued. And that's done through excellent listening. And I talk about this all the time. I don't know if you've ever heard this acronym. It's not my own. I can't remember who actually coined it, but it's kind of been going around in the medical and counselor field for a while. And it's the acronym WAIT, WAIT. And it stands for Why Am I Talking? And I love that because, like you said, we need to let the patients talk a little bit more. We need to listen and really be curious and find out, hey, what's going on? Why is this hard for you? How can I help you make it easier? Instead of us just talking and sharing all this information, because like you said in the beginning, information doesn't lead to change. So I'm curious if you have any tips on what a practitioner can do when a patient really does appear to be struggling and you've been working with them for a while and you want to label them as non-compliant. What things can we practically tell our listeners to do for that patient sitting across from them who's just having a really hard time?
That is a great question. So you can go back to those 3 areas that I talked about, and those can help to guide you through these specific situations. So let's say that you have somebody who has been trying to implement these changes and they come back and obviously it doesn't look like anything's changed on the outside, right? Their numbers haven't changed. Their outlook or their attitude hasn't really changed. In fact, they probably feel more frustrated than they did the first time that they came in and they talked to you. So the first area that I talked about, which was building connection, it's really important to reinforce the relationship. I know when they come back and the result hasn't changed, it's really easy to focus on that. You know, this number hasn't changed. You haven't achieved success. And what you really want to do is to give the person a lecture, or you're just feeling really angry, right? Well, the most important thing that you can do is really just reach out and connect with that person as a human being and ask them, hey, listen, it looks like you haven't achieved the results that we were looking for. Let's do a check-in. Tell me what's going on here. How are you doing? How are you feeling about this? What are some of the challenges that you have going on in your life right now? So first of all, just relating to the person and inviting them to share some things with you. And let me tell you, one of the things about building connection that's so important is that you really want to have open communication with that person. We think it's faster to just tell people what to do. That's the faster way to give information, but the faster way to get people to change is to actually have them do as much of the talking as possible. So the more that you can ask questions and get your clients talking or get your patient talking, that's how you're going to engage their brains. And in order to get them to change, they're going to need to figure out how to engage their brains a little bit differently, right? So that is the building connection part. The second thing is that you want to go and look at some of the change strategies that you're using. As a first reflex, the thought is, you know what, this seems like it's a lot. How can we shrink this to make it easier? And if you already ask them, what are you struggling with? That's going to help you to really target your intervention. So, you know, if the thing that they're struggling with is, let's say that they have a pill, you know, maybe the pill is big and it's difficult for them to swallow. Or maybe the pill gives them uncomfortable side effects. Or maybe they haven't been able to get the pill because they're running into all of these issues with insurance. Like each of those gives you a different sort of line for helping this person to be able to achieve whatever it is that they need to do. And the same thing would go if you're looking at incorporating different foods. Maybe it's somebody who's providing food for a family. And if they introduce these foods, it means their family might not be willing to eat those things. So maybe you want to look at, well, maybe instead of changing everything, maybe you could just add something to the table, add some fruit, add a salad, add something that's going to be a good choice for you instead of changing everything all at once. And then the last part is the mindset piece. And what I really encourage you to do is to look at how are you defining success? So is success achieving a certain number? Is it achieving a certain level? Or is success showing up every day and knowing what the behaviors are that you need to do and doing those no matter what the results are? For example, working with people on dialysis, we talk a lot about phosphate binders, and phosphate binders can be a challenge because even if you're a good pill taker and you're good at taking your pills in the morning and the evening, phosphate binders are something you have to take at mealtime. And that's different. It's not what people are used to. And so sometimes what we have to do is look at, maybe taking all of these pills is a challenge, but why don't we choose one meal and let's measure your success by whether you actually take the pill at that meal every day. So when I see a patient, when I follow up with them, I can say, hey, how are you doing at taking this phosphate binder at dinner? How many days this past week were you able to do that? And then the patient can actually give me a measure of their success. And even though I haven't seen the result change yet, I know that the patient is thinking about what they need to be doing. And the more that they continue to do that and engage their brain, the more likely they are to continue working on building that into a habit, the more consistent that they're going to get. And hopefully at the end, we're going to achieve results. But it really is staying focused specifically on what is success and how are we going to measure that in a way that's going to help you to feel successful, whether or not you actually get to the result.
I love your last point. And, in January, there's always this renewed inspiration and excitement for change. Everybody sets these really high goals and high standards. And I actually did a series, and the third one is called Beyond BMI. So if you guys want to check that out, it's a provider's guide to helping your patients lose weight. And in that episode, I actually talked a lot about what does success look like for your patient, because it might be different for the patient than what us as clinicians are thinking. As clinicians, we want to get their labs down. We want to help them lose weight, but it might be different for the patient. They might feel successful if they feel more confident in a suit. Or they might be successful if they have the energy to play with their grandchildren and crawl around on the floor. And so I think it's so important what you had just said to define success for the patient, because it might be a better indication of them getting towards those results, like you had said. And I think that is such an important piece if the patient is struggling, is to just kind of like take a step back and say, hey, what are we working towards? Like, what do you want to work towards? What's your goal in all of this? I would love if you could share with us any resources that you might recommend for any listeners who do want to learn a little bit more about behavior change or become as well versed as yourself.
I do have a few books that I love. These were actually some of the first books that I read that really sort of started my interest in this area and started getting me experimenting and trying different things with my patients. The first one is called Switch: How to Change Things When Change is Hard. It's written by the Heath brothers, and it's got so many powerful stories. It's just a great variety of change strategies. Another one is called Atomic Habits by James Clear. I know that's a really popular book. A lot of people have read that. I know a lot of people have it on their shelves. And the last one, which for me was very transformational, is a book called Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg. He is a fantastic behavior scientist, and he really will show you how you can shrink changes smaller and how to set prompts and triggers that are going to help people achieve success.
Laura, if you want to share your socials and just other places where people can hang out with you and connect with you, that would be awesome.
So you can find me on Instagram at Behavior Change for Dietitians. I'm also active on LinkedIn. You can find me there at Laura Kohler. And I did recently start a dietitian book club. I would love professionals from any health backgrounds to come and join us. And that's something you can find at my website, which is transformrd.com. And I would love to invite you there. I also do have a freebie on my site. It is 25 questions to help you get unstuck during client sessions. So it's basically specific questions about change, and you could use them to be conversation starters.
So I'm definitely going to link to Laura's website and that freebie down in the show notes below. Thank you for giving us the gift of your time and your wisdom today, Laura. I would love to have more conversations with you, and we'd love to have you back on again.
Oh, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed being here. I'd do this again in a heartbeat.
All right, guys, now it's time for my nutrition notes. Today's conversation was chock full of practical strategies that you can implement today when working with your clients. However, I wanted to linger on one specific area, and that's all about building connection. So I wanted to share one question that I ask every single patient. Whether I'm working with a patient concerned about their picky eater, or a teen who won't eat breakfast, or an adult struggling to lose weight. Before I give my advice, I ask them, can I make a suggestion? This creates a collaborative, trusted stance with a patient. It evokes a sense that we're facing this problem together in a safe, judgment-free way, and that their opinion actually matters to me. When discussing nutrition, remember, you need to collaborate, don't command. So the next time you're working with a patient, before you just jump to give your advice or your suggestions, start by asking, can I make a suggestion? I promise you this will change the entire patient visit. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. If you'd like to connect with me, you can find me on Instagram at Exam Room Nutrition. That's all for today. So as always, let's continue to make our patients healthier, one exam room at a time.